Palestine is a country from the river to the sea, from the border of Lebanon in the north to the Gulf of Aqaba and Murashrash in the south. It is a very well-defined country. It's Palestine. It can be free, it must be free, it will be free, but we all have to act. The story of the Zionists is not that they came to Palestine and made it bloom, is that they came to a blooming country and they stole it. As they say in Arabic, أخذوها مفروشة. أخذوها مفروشة. Shamelessly, violently, they stole money from the banks. They stole the produce from the fields. They stole cities. They stole agricultural machinery. They stole everything. How many civilians need to die? How many? How many more? What more needs to be destroyed? Zionism is a form of racism. It's brutal. It's violent. If we believe in justice, if we believe in freedom, if we believe in human rights, we cannot call that country Israel any longer. That the Palestinian story is a story of violence, it's a story of death, it's a bloody history. But that's far, far from the truth. The bloody history in Palestine is not the Palestinian story. The bloody history in Palestine is the Zionist story. And what we see, what we know now, is that Palestine has had a glorious, magnificent history. The book by Nur Masalha that came out a few years ago, a 4,000-year history of Palestine. He quotes Egyptian sources, Assyrian sources, the great Greek historian Herodotus, Aristotle, who all referred to that country by its name, Palestine. We know that for the last several hundred years, Palestine has been innovative, creative. There has been a creative, innovative society, agriculture, relations with other countries. The Naqab, which they pretend was somehow, some kind of a deserted desert, but is actually a very, very fertile desert, was exporting barley to the UK. Other parts of Palestine were exporting oil and cotton. And everybody around the world referred to Palestine as Palestine. The story of Dahir al-Ammar, who really turned Palestine into a powerhouse in the 18th century. When we look at aerial photos taken by the British when the British occupation of Palestine began, particularly in the Naqab, we see enormous tracts of cultivated land. The story of the Zionists is not that they came to Palestine and made it bloom, is that they came to a blooming country and they stole it. As they say in Arabic, أخذوها مفروشة. أخذوها مفروشة. Shamelessly, violently, they stole money from the banks. They stole the produce from the fields. They stole cities. They stole agricultural machinery. They stole everything. They did not make the desert bloom. They stole a blooming desert. And suddenly, on the 15th of May, 1948, a glorious history of 4,000 years became an historical footnote. Nobody remembers. Nobody knows what happened in Palestine for the last 4,000 years. All that people talk about is the biblical mythology and then modern-day Zionism. Nothing important happened. Everything is being taught, everything is being discussed in this context of mythology and lies. I know, as I grew up and was raised in the Israeli education system, nothing significant happened for 2,000 years. The Jews were kicked out, and then the Zionists came back. And this is what we hear. This is what politicians talk about. This is what is happening in the education system here in America. This is the true story. This is the true narrative, and we have to reverse the narrative. We cannot go on letting the Zionists push forward this narrative of lies, of mythology, at the expense of a glorious narrative of Palestine. A narrative that includes tolerance and culture and various religions. And as we look at the glorious monuments that still exist, the ones that the Zionists have not yet destroyed, look at Aqsa. Look at the compound. Look at the mosque. Forget for a moment even the religious significance. This glorious monument that has been crowning Jerusalem for over 1,000 years, 1,500 years. And there is serious talk about destroying it and replacing it with some other hocus-pocus temple. That, by the way, the most Orthodox, the most religious Jews reject. It's part of the Zionist narrative to bring back this temple, because that is how we will truly show that we're back. That is how we will truly have gained our sovereignty in our ancient homeland. What ancient homeland? It used to be, the discussion used to be that it was only crazies like the violent, very violent and dangerous JDL and some, Kahana types that were talking about the destruction of Al-Aqsa. Over the last several years, this movement to destroy Al-Aqsa and build a temple has been gaining enormous support in Israel. Tens of thousands go on their tours, these provocation tours, where they stop and they pray. And I actually took a tour by mistake. I was there. I was in Palestine in May. I was in Palestine twice recently, once in May and once in July. And I decided to go on during visiting hours to walk around the Al-Aqsa compound. There's a great deal that's been happening, of course, with the uprising in May. Al-Aqsa was the center of focus. And I didn't realize that you couldn't go anymore unless you went with one of these tours. And as you walk, some of you may know this, as you walk from the wall, the Jewish wall, towards Al-Aqsa, there's a bridge, and halfway up the bridge, they built this enormous model of the Jewish temple, and you have to stay there and wait, and you walk along with these lunatics, settlers, and an enormous armed guard, and you go through the compound, and nobody else is allowed on the compound as this is going on. These people are in the cabinet, they're in the Knesset, they are making decisions. And the question that I always ask myself is, what needs to happen in Palestine so that people stand? In May, there was an uprising. I'm sure all of you remember. Palestinians paid a heavy price, as they always do. But it was a heroic uprising. A heroic uprising. While it was going on, and certainly after that, there were huge protests around the world. Record numbers. I was there as the bombs were falling in Gaza. I was in Jerusalem, texting and talking to people in Gaza, friends, less than 100 kilometers away, and of course, unable to do anything. But the question that I ask is, what are we doing protesting after the fact? Protesting after the fact is too late. They already killed these children. They already killed people in Gaza. We need to stand up and prevent the next attack. That's what we need to be doing. We need to demand that our elected officials do everything they can so the state of Israel has no bombs, no planes, no tanks, no bullets. They cannot attack Gaza anymore. What needs to happen before that takes place? Why is there no fly? How come they don't impose a no-fly zone over Gaza? How many civilians need to die? How many? How many more? What more needs to be destroyed? The state of it, people like to talk about a status quo. Status quo? There's no status quo. Palestine is burning. They're destroying Palestine like Roman legions going through the countryside. Thank God there's still Al-Aqsa. But you know how many of these magnificent mosques, magnificent churches, ancient cemeteries have been destroyed and are being destroyed as we speak? because they don't want anything to remain that reminds the world of this glorious history that preceded 1948, May of 1948. They do this by design. They pretend to care about archaeology, and they have all these archaeological museums and sites. This is not archaeology, it's mythology. They destroy the real archaeology. Ask the people in Silwan, where they built this ridiculous biblical city of David. Ask the people in Silwan, they'll tell you how many historical, crucially important archaeological sites and monuments around Jerusalem were destroyed in the area of Silwan. Why are they after Sheikh Jarrah? Magnificent neighborhood. The beautiful Orient House, Dar al-Tifl al-Arabi, all part of Sheikh Jarrah. Hind al-Husseini Women's College in Sheikh Jarrah, the beautiful American Colony Hotel. Sheikh Jarrah, the mosque and the place where the Sheikh Jarrah was buried is in Sheikh Jarrah. They want to destroy it and build condos for settlers. I have friends who live there. Every time I was there twice, I went to visit them, and you see the settlers seething and the beautiful Palestinian homes. This beautiful Palestinian neighborhood. Why do they want to destroy it? Because it demonstrates that there was something better, more beautiful, more significant that existed before this brutal apartheid regime was established in Palestine. That's why they are destroying this. So what is it going to take for our elected officials to understand that we will not accept this any longer? Any elected official that dares to associate themselves with Zionism needs to be told that Zionism, like anti-Semitism, like white supremacy and all forms of racism, there should be no tolerance. There should be zero tolerance. Just like we talk about zero tolerance to any other form of racism. Can you imagine an elected official that prides themselves that they're anti-Semitic or that they're a white supremacist? But they're proud to say that they're Zionists. Zionism is a form of racism. It's brutal. It's violent. I think we all saw Phil Weiss, the emotion of talking about Zionism and how it destroyed what it did to the American Jewish community. There is a reason why hundreds of thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews in New York, in London, in Palestine rejected Zionism from the beginning. You know, in the year 1900, Zionism was very young. In the year 1900, the most important rabbis of the time came out with a book, a short book that they published in Hebrew, which is rare because they only use Hebrew for prayer. And in this book, they warned the Jewish communities around the world from the dangers of Zionism. And you know what they said? 3 things. They said Zionism will bring violence to the Holy Land. They said Zionism will ruin the good relations between Jews and Arabs and Muslims around the world. And they said Zionism will create a reality that the loyalty of Jews is being questioned in the countries in which they live. Because Jews are called upon by Jewish law to be good citizens wherever they live. The idea of sovereignty in the Holy Land is prohibited for Jewish people according to Jewish law. This was in 1900 they came out with these 3 warnings. They weren't prophets, they were smart, they had eyes, they read. They saw what the Zionists were saying, they read what the Zionists were writing, and they knew exactly what Zionism was going to bring to the Holy Land, and they rejected it then, and they still rejected it, and they still continue to reject this. You know, I want to recommend a couple of things. You know, this book by Nur Masalha, Palestine, a 4,000-year history. I think it just came out in Arabic as well. It's a must-read. Mansour Nassasra, who's a Palestinian Bedouin from the Naqab, also wrote an incredible book about the Palestinian Bedouin in the Naqab. Information nobody even knows. People don't even consider the Nakab as part of Palestine. And a wonderful book by Fatma Qasim, Dr. Fatma Qasim, also who teaches in the Nakab, lives in Bersaba, about women's narratives about the Nakba. Women's narratives. She interviewed women in Ramle, in Lid, who survived the Nakba. My friend Ibrahim Daya is here. First time I ever heard about what happened in Lid, the horrible massacres that took place in Lid, was from Ibrahim many, many years ago. I visited Lid just now during my last visit, and I had an opportunity to interview Fidash Hadeh. Fidash Hadeh is an incredible Palestinian woman. During the uprising of May, she was the voice. Young woman, she's a council member of the city of Lid. And she took me around this incredible city with an incredibly rich history. So in front of the mosque where the terrible massacre took place, the state of Israel established like a big plaza. And the plaza is named after the Jewish terrorist group that committed the massacre in Lid. Palmach Plaza, in front of the mosque, where this horrific massacre took place. Never mind, there were massacres. They were murdering women and children in the streets like it was nothing. And she was optimistic. I said, what are you optimistic about? She said, well, during the uprising in May, or the actual uprising of May, brought about a new generation into the resistance, a new awareness, new collaboration. People don't even realize, people forgot that Lid and Ramle and Yafa and Nasra and Haifa, Bersaba, the entire Nakab, which is almost 60% of Palestine, is Palestine. It's all Palestine. It's all Palestine. We have to bring that back into the story, into the narrative. I don't have to tell people here are from these places, or your parents came from these places. I remember going to, the first time I started going to ADC conferences and other Arab conferences here in America, you see the tiny little kids running around. Where are you from? I'm from Yafa. I'm from Haifa. I'm from Askelan. I'm from Isdud. Little kids, 5 years old. They can't even read a map yet. But they know the village, they know the town, they know where they're from. We need to remember and remind people. Not only because it's true, but because the reality is that Palestinians in the Nakab, for the last several years, over 2,000 homes have been demolished only for Palestinians in the Nakab. Palestinians in the Nakab have no access to water. Almost over 100,000 Palestinians in the Nakab who are citizens of the state of Israel live in towns, in villages that the state refuses to provide them with health care, education, access to water, access to electricity. If God forbid there's an accident, there are no roads. We're not talking about 1,000 people, 100 people. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of Palestinian citizens of Israel, forgotten in the Nakab. And when they stood up, as they did, well, they did several times, but last time when they stood up in May, the beatings, the arrests, of course, house demolitions, and they brought settlers from El Khalil, from the West Bank, into Bersaba, into Lid, hundreds of them armed in order to instigate and provoke and kill. And then the Palestinians are blamed for violence. I don't know if you all saw, but there was this magnificent shot of a young man in Lid climbing up the flagpole, taking out the Zionist flag and putting in the Palestinian flag. That was a great moment. Nobody thought that Lid could do that. You know the famous rap, the rap band Dam, the Palestinian rap musicians Dam. Tamer, who is from Lid, said when he heard Tupac, he thought he was talking about Lid. It's that insane what is happening there. So we have to remind people, and we have to take this role of explaining because nobody else is going to do it. Sometimes I think we expect somebody else to come and save Palestine. If we don't save Palestine, nobody will save Palestine. There is nobody else coming. There is no Salah ad-Din coming back. We are the Salah ad-Din. Nobody else is going to come and do it. We are the ones that have to demand that our elected officials reject Zionism before we even let them in the door. We have to demand that. You know, the great Ghada Karmi, a professor in London, who I interviewed as well, she says this so beautifully and so clearly. There must be zero tolerance to Zionism. We must reject Zionism. We must demand our neighbors, our friends, our politicians reject Zionism, just like they reject anti-Semitism and other forms of racism. Zionism belongs in that same column. Now, Palestine has been through a lot over the last few months. We saw the uprising in May. We saw the beating, the brutal beating and murder of Nizar al-Banat in the PA prisons. We saw the heroic escape of 6 Palestinian prisoners from Gilboa prison. Yeah. But what is the lesson? What is the lesson when this is taking place? What does it mean? What does it say to us? What does it call upon us to do? To change this from the paradigm of this ongoing nonsensical conversation about 2 states. We need to put it aside and forget it. It's a myth. It's built on a Zionist construct. I know because my father was one of the people who invented this notion for Zionist reasons. And we need to bring back Palestine as Palestine. Palestine is an entire country. It was an entire country. It needs to come back to becoming another country, a single country, and forget this nonsense about Israel. Israel is an occupying power. It has been from the very beginning. It's a regime that should not be tolerated, should not be legitimized, should not be, and should be rejected completely. When people ask me, when I say Palestine, what do you mean? I say, what do you mean, what do I mean? Palestine is Palestine. There's no such thing as Palestine and Israel. There's a Palestine. Now, if you accept Israel, then by all means, you have to know, or the people that do must know, they're accepting that Palestine, all of Palestine, is a violent, brutal, racist, apartheid regime. That's what you recognize. That's what we legitimize when we use the name Israel, when we recognize the state of Israel. That has to be made absolutely clear. If we believe in justice, if we believe in freedom, if we believe in human rights, we cannot call that country Israel any longer. It is Palestine. It must be considered Palestine. It must be called Palestine. Every day, all day, and all the time. It's not enough just to talk about it. We have to act. We need to demand all of it, unconditional. All of it, unconditional. That has to be the name of the game. Unconditional return, unconditional release of prisoners, unconditional freeing of Gaza, ending the Gaza siege. That has to be the name of the game. That is the only way that we can win. No longer a flag in tatters in Washington, D.C., but a proud, beautiful Palestinian flag that represents pride, that represents the beauty, that represents the history of this magnificent country that so many of you call home. We must act because there's nobody else is going to do it. We cannot ask the PA to do it. They can't, even if they wanted to. We can't ask the Israelis, we can't wait for the Israelis to agree. There has to be a demand for boycott. There has to be a demand for sanctions. There has to be a demand for divestment. Now, not tomorrow, right now. Palestine is a country from the river to the sea, from the border of Lebanon in the north to the Gulf of Aqaba and Rashash in the south. It is a very well-defined country. It's Palestine. It can be free. It must be free. It will be free, but we all have to act. Thank you very much.